Dad had a talent.
There's nobody out there who does what he did. He was just that good.
But it's lost on his son.
When you're 16 or 17 years old, the last thing you're worried about is your dad up in a building models.
This strange inheritance ultimately brings them together.
When his father was alive, he did not want Larry to touch him, and I can only imagine what he's thinking now.
How would you describe this inheritance?
A little bit more of a journey than I was prepared for.
So is it time to take a new tack?
I know you've said, Larry, that you'd never seriously considered selling, but now that you hear this... I'm Jamie Colby, and today I'm driving into the oldest settlement in Louisiana. It's called Natchitoches. It's rich in Southern charm and Civil War history. Battles raged nearby, both along and on the Red River. Well, that history inspired one man's remarkable craftsmanship, but it left his son wondering what the heck to do with all the crafts.
My name is Larry Atteridge. In 2008, my father passed away and left behind his life's work, a massive fleet of amazingly detailed model ships he built from scratch.
Hi, Larry, I'm Jamie.
Well, hi, Jamie. Nice to meet you.
Great to meet you. Thanks for inviting me deep into Louisiana. It sure is pretty.
Well, I've got a lot to show you. Come this way.
Larry invites me in to see some of his father's Civil War ships. This is one cool viewer submission. Which one is that?
This is the Eastport, which was on the Red River here in Natchitoches Parish. It was one of the largest ironclads of the Civil War. It was 280 foot long, and it weighed 770 tons.
With the Civil War, I first think of great armies clashing at Gettysburg, Shiloh, and Antietam, not naval battles. But that's the story these miniature vessels tell. When war between the states breaks out in 1861, Union General Winfield Scott creates the Anaconda Plan. The idea, blockade southern ports, take control of the Mississippi, and like a huge snake, squeeze the South into submission. The Union builds a navy of more than 600 ships.
They would commandeer boats from people, ferry boats, paddle wheelers, anything that floated, and they could put a gun on it.
Larry's father, William, made models of many of them. There's the CSS Gaines, a wooden sidewheel Confederate gunboat built in Mobile, Alabama. There's the USS Vicksburg and the CSS Alabama, a massive propeller-driven ship built in secrecy in England for the Confederacy. All are made precisely to scale. 1 inch here translates to 8 feet on the real vessel. Where did this all begin? Did Dad buy a book on shipbuilding?
I don't remember anybody ever teaching him how to do this. It's just something you have to be born with.
William Atteridge Jr. is born in 1929 in Highland Park, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. From an early age, he's fascinated by the ships he sees on Lake Michigan and dreams of one day setting sail. In 1951, during the Korean War, William joins the Navy and travels the Pacific on the USS Valley Forge. The 22-year-old specializes in cosmetic maintenance, doing the detail work.
The 45 that you see on the USS Valley Forge, he was one of the guys that painted the numbers on the aircraft carrier he was on.
William is honorably discharged in 1955, returns home, gets married, and starts a family. Larry's the youngest of 3 kids. The family settles in central Louisiana, where William's artistic skills lead him to a job.
He started out as a draftsman for the mobile home industry. He just had an incredible talent for artistry.
Did you inherit the artistry gene?
No.
When he's not buried behind a stack of blueprints, William loves to travel the country.
He took us to national parks all over the United States. But it seems like we always ended up at a naval air base or some military museum.
Then in the mid-1970s, a trip to Vicksburg, Mississippi sparks William's creative passion. More than 100 years earlier, the USS Cairo was the first vessel ever to be sunk using a mine remotely detonated by hand. William's there to watch it go on display after being raised from the Yazoo River.
He started getting involved with the museum people over there, and next thing I knew, he was building ships.
The 46-year-old father of three starts with his own miniature version of the massive Cairo. Piece by piece out of pine and cypress, the smokestacks, the deck boards, cannons, even miniature ropes. It takes 2 months.
You know, he would make the little doors and the little lifeboats, and then he would paint them, and he would drive little nails into the deck.
Amazing.
And he just went haywire with it, really.
Over the next decade, William builds a Civil War flotilla. There's the CSS Virginia, the first steam-powered ironclad warship built by the Confederate Navy. The USS Neosho, a Union vessel with a steam-powered front gun turret that can spin 360 degrees. That's some firepower. And the CSS Calhoun, a civilian steamer converted into a 500-ton side-wheel gunboat. All with the precision you'd expect from a career draftsman.
Before he built a ship, he'd study it. He had blueprints from the Smithsonian Institution, and if they didn't exist, he would draw his own set of blueprints.
Down to the finest detail.
He was a fanatic about it.
Was your mom applauding his efforts?
Not really. I recall her not being all that thrilled with Dad spending a lot of time in the shop.
But he wouldn't stop.
Oh, no, but it became an obsession.
By the time William retires in the early 1980s, he's churned out more than 500 ships. That's when the hobbyist decides to share his fleet with the world. He builds an annex on his property, next to the family home in Arcadia, Louisiana, his very own Civil War Naval Museum.
Let's be honest, most people would build maybe an addition to their house. Your dad told your mom, I'm going to build a museum for the ships.
You know, for lack of better terms, I think he didn't really listen to much about what my mother had to say.
William doesn't even let his son touch his delicate crafts. Not that Larry's interested.
As a young man, I didn't pay as much attention to what he was doing. When you're 16 or 17 years old, the last thing you're worried about is your dad up in a building models.
But outside the family, word is spreading about a reclusive shipwright in the woods of Louisiana. They call from around the country and around the world. Civil War buffs and private collectors not only want to see his work, they want to buy it.
Was this profit-making for him?
That's next.
But first, our strange inheritance quiz question. The CSS Virginia was a Confederate ironclad warship, also known by what name? The Monitor, the Merrimack, or Old Ironsides? The answer after the break. So, by what name was the CSS Virginia also known? The answer is B, the Merrimack. It was a Union ship salvaged by the South and rechristened as the Virginia. In 1862, it faced off against the Monitor in the first duel between ironclad ships.
By the 1990s, William Atteridge has built an armada of nearly 1,000 model ships. Visitors from around the world travel to his makeshift museum in the Louisiana woods to see his amazing craft.
Did he charge people to come in?
His museum was donations only. They would drop a couple of dollars in a bucket, and he'd let them go through there, and he would talk them to death. And finally, it was almost like, okay, we got to go.
One of his early patrons, Louisiana State University historian Gary Joyner.
Do you remember the first time walking in?
Absolutely. The first thing I saw was this giant model of the CSS Arkansas. I said, you know what you're doing.
Was he a teacher?
He was to me. He was a historical sponge.
Gary commissions William to build ships to use as visual aids in his classes, 17 in all.
What'd you pay?
I think I paid $175 at the time.
Was it a steal?
Oh, yes, without a doubt. He was just that good.
Later, even museums commissioned ships from William.
Was this profit-making for him?
He didn't make enough. My dad was a very kind soul, and he did a lot of things out of the goodness of his heart.
What would it cost for a ship?
Back in those days, he might get $300 or $400, and he would spend 2 months building it.
Year after year, he churns out models. Then, in 2005, William is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and given 6 months to live. Larry has long since moved out. He now owns a successful ambulance company 2 hours away. But he starts making the trip back and forth every week. It's the most treasured time he ever spends with his father.
During that period of time is when he taught me the most about these ships and about him. The realization came forward that we didn't really know each other.
Do you wish you had spent more time with him?
Absolutely. We loved each other, but we just didn't have that closeness.
William Atteridge outlives his prognosis by 3 years. He dies in 2008 at age 78.
Were you with him when he passed?
Yes, it was just me and him. I just told him I loved him and, kissed him on the forehead, which is probably the first time I ever remember kissing my father.
And with that, Larry comes into his strange inheritance. More than 100 ships, the blueprints he built them from, as well as the records of another 1,000+ models he sold through the years. An archive of the hobby his father elevated to an art form.
Have you had this collection appraised since you inherited it?
I did when he first passed away. I think it was around $130,000.
Would you sell?
Not for $130,000. The emotional attachment to me is worth a great deal more than that.
But things can change, and as you will see, they do for Larry, more than once.
How would you describe this inheritance?
It was a little bit more of a journey than I was prepared for.
That's next.
Here's another quiz question for you. The first American submarine used in combat was named after what animal? The turtle, the duck, or the dolphin? Extra credit if you can name the war during which it was deployed. So, the first American submarine used in combat was named after what animal? The answer is A, the turtle. Its inventor tried and failed to attach a time bomb to the hull of a British ship in New York Harbor during the Revolutionary War.
It's 2008, and Larry Atteridge has just been left his strange inheritance. More than 100 scale-model Civil War ships built by his father, stacks of blueprints, and a request.
Do you remember your last conversation?
What he asked me to do was to take the collection, to show them in his honor, and keep them together.
So you're guarding the fleet?
Yes.
With his father's ship collection more than 2 hours away from his home, Larry decides to move them to a closer port. A bed and breakfast in nearby Natchitoches agrees to put them on display.
These are so delicate. How do you even go about moving that many ships?
I rented a 26-foot U-Haul truck. We got furniture tarps and put them on the floor.
Larry's wife, Pam, lends a hand with some hesitation.
When his father was alive, he did not want Larry to touch him, and I can only imagine what he's thinking now.
The ships go on exhibit in Natchitoches, with Larry serving as the curator. But just a year later, with his ambulance business growing, Larry decides he no longer has time to manage them.
All of a sudden, I realized that I have to move these again.
He reaches out to the state of Louisiana, and they're on board. For a second time, Larry carefully packs up his sprawling and delicate fleet. This time, he ships it to a state museum in Tioga, Louisiana. 5 years pass. Then Larry receives an alarming phone call. The museum's unstable, literally.
How unstable?
It was about to cave in. Then it became a kind of a panic situation for us.
For a third time, Larry scrambles to relocate his strange inheritance. He decides just to bring it home, where the boats will be absolutely safe, he thinks. Then, early one morning,
My stepdaughter came into the room and said, "Hey, the house is on fire."
The whole house within 5 minutes was in flames.
in the 40 minutes it takes the fire department to reach their rural location, the Atteridge house burns to the ground.
We lost everything.
So you escaped with your family, but the ships?
They were still in the museum.
Thankfully, there'd been a delay in delivering custom-built cabinets to the house, and the models stayed put.
Wow, someone was protecting them.
It's just by the grace of God, I think.
Unfortunately, most of his father's sale records for ships that he had sold were in the house and are lost in the fire.
Have you ever had a moment where you've said, I do need to sell them?
Yes, it's crossed my mind.
We know one potential buyer, R. Michael Wall, founder of the American Marine Model Gallery in Gloucester, Massachusetts. When Larry called us, we called Michael.
I've never seen a collection like this, especially of Civil War models.
So what's involved in appraising a collection like this?
Well, for example, I chose this model of Arkansas because it's probably one of the biggest ones in the collection. I love it because of the artistry that is done with the finish. I feel something like this would probably be worth between $5,500 and $6,500.
Wow.
The appraiser says William Atteridge's model of the USS Cairo would also go for about $6,000. And Larry has about 100 more.
Michael, what do you sense could happen if Larry were willing to part with the collection?
Basically, I broke down the collection in 3 parts: the high-end, the mid-range models, and then the low-range. The total was $279,000.
Okay.
Quite a collection.
So I know you've said, Larry, that you'd never seriously considered selling, but now that you hear this...
That's next. What's your strange inheritance story? We'd love to tell it. Send me an email or go to our website, strangeinheritance.com.
Now, back to Strange Inheritance.
Larry Atteridge is weighing his options after receiving an appraisal of $279,000 for more than 100 Civil War model ships that his late father painstakingly built over a lifetime.
So, Larry, how does that compare to the appraisal you got years ago?
Well, it's a big surprise. It's much higher than it was.
Well, your dad did great work, and I think it's just a testament to what he put into this.
In fact, when you consider that Larry's father sold at least 10 times as many models as he kept, there may well be $2 to $3 million of William Atteridge originals floating around the world. Pretty impressive for just an old guy with a hobby.
So, Larry, I know you've never seriously considered selling, but now that you've heard this, did you change your mind?
Well, got a lot to think about. I believe I'll hold on to them, keep them in the family and in the bloodline.
It's a lot of money. You couldn't use the money?
Now, obviously, we could use it, but we're not in that situation, so we'll just hold on to them and keep them in Dad's honor.
And finally, in a permanent home.
here they are.
Very, very impressive.
Yep, those display cases finally arrived. So inside their new house, Larry and Pam have created a mini maritime museum. A contemporary version of the one William had out in the woods all those years ago. Minus, of course, the workshop, the donation bucket, and the model shipbuilder, ready, as his son recalls, to talk his visitors to death.
Do you see your father in these?
Absolutely. You know, I wake up every day and there they are. And I think it's my long-lasting relationship with my father. You know, if it wasn't for that, I don't know that I'd have anything.
In that house fire, Larry lost records from about 1,000 of his dad's models. Well, he's hoping you can help him locate those missing ships. If you look closely at Bill Attridge's work, you can sometimes find a sticker with his name, like this one here. And if you see one, email me a picture at jamie@strangeinheritance.com. Thanks so much for watching, and remember, you can't take it with you.